Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go-around is Rob Lawless, or as I like to refer to him, a younger, better-looking version of Greg. Rob is on an adventure to make 10,000 friends. In fact, he's made it his job, right? His occupation. After about 7 years, he's a little over halfway there. There are so many parallels between our missions, it's honestly pretty crazy, that it seems we spend just a good bit of time comparing notes, which is actually really interesting for me. In fact, I think it's inspired me to start doing some public speaking surrounding what I've learned, right? I guess inspiration is all around us all the time. You just got to be ready for it. At any rate, I hope you enjoy this chat with Rob. Rob, thank you for joining me on the Why Am I podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's good to connect with you. I'm excited for our chat.
Yeah, for sure, man. You are, I'm not going to say you're a hard man to get a hold of, but it seems like you stay pretty busy, dude.
I try to. I try to always have myself in one meeting or another. But yeah, I'm happy that we had the chance to connect because with my project, which I'm sure we'll talk about, it ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's super, super busy. A bunch of people are reaching out. Other times not as busy. But everyone who reaches out to me is someone that I want to meet. So yeah, I'm happy we can make it happen.
Man, that's a cool way of looking at it. Mine, nobody ever reaches out to me. I'm always constantly on the prowl, stalking people. So yeah, trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's hope this will turn it around, Rob. You're gonna inspire people to reach out to me. I love it. All right. Well, normally my favorite way of meeting a new person, and this is super polarizing, but it's I like to sit down next to him and say, "So who are you?" Right? It's my favorite thing to do, and it takes people back. It takes them a second, but it quickly finds my tribe. Like I figure out who are my people very, very rapidly. Rob, so who are you, bud?
I am an adventurer.
Adventurer?
Yeah, a curious adventurer. And I think that's something that I've been my entire life and something that I strive to be today. So I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia. So I had a front yard that was steep, it was good for sledding, and a backyard that was good enough for a baseball field and a football field, depending on what you were playing that day. I had a pool in the backyard and woods across the street, and I'm the youngest of three in my family. So my sister's 6 years older than me, my brother's 2 years older than me. And I think it's funny, I have a nephew now, he's going to turn 3 in July, and another nephew who's 15 months old. And I can see my curiosity, like that I had as a kid, I can see it in them again. Like whether they'll play, I was with them this weekend and they just spent hours playing with rocks or digging in the dirt. And from an adult perspective, it's like, what are you doing over there? But from a childhood perspective, they're in this magical world. And I think I had a very strong sense of that as a kid. And then I feel like as we become older and get into adulthood, life becomes a bit more serious. And it's like, then you got to go to college and you got to get your degree and you have to find the stable job and you have to work in the office and get the health insurance and find your spouse and settle down and all that stuff. And those are things I still want to do, but not the office one. I never wanted to sit in an office for 40 years until retirement. So I always thought, how can I escape this corporate life path? I studied finance at Penn State, and then I minored in accounting and entrepreneurship, and I did consulting for Deloitte after school. So I did my time in the corporate office setting, realized it wasn't for me, even if it paid well. Then I went to a tech startup, and then I started this journey to spend an hour one-on-one with 10,000 different people. And I've been able to be on an adventure for the last 7.5 years, and I'll be on an adventure for the next 8 or so. So I'm an adventurer.
So you said 7.5 years, and you calculate that you'll be doing it for another 8. Where does that number come from, man?
I started this project November of 2015, and I have met just over 5,600 people to date. And I started November 2015, and I was working for a tech startup at the time. And then 8 months later, that company was acquired, so I was laid off. So then I jumped into this full time. So I've been doing this full time since July of 2016. And just looking at the numbers, like at 5,600, if I meet an average of 600 people a year, it'll take me like 7 years and a third of a year or something like that to finish.
God,
And
that's like 2 a year, right? Or 2 a day, I should say.
yeah, which seems really doable, and it should be. Like it's slowed down. In most years, I was meeting like 800 people, but I finally just in the last 2 years found a way to support myself financially through speaking about my project at like conferences and companies and stuff. So as that is increasing and I'm finally able to find stability, the time that I have to dedicate to meetings each day is decreasing. Like next June 11th, I'm flying to Vegas and I'll be speaking on that Monday and I'll be speaking that Tuesday and then I'm flying home that Wednesday. So that's like 3 days out of the year right there that are taken and not being able to be put towards meeting people. So yeah, I just think like 600 a year for the next 7.5 years or so. That's kind of like the quota that I have for myself.
That feels right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. So I love to have somebody describe themselves. You gave me a pretty good description so far, and I truly want to see you the way you see yourself, right? So number one, first and foremost, you said adventurous. So I'm assuming maybe early in life you weren't always so adventurous in this. Does this feel a little crazy to you, what you're doing right now?
No, it's the opposite. It's that I was adventurous and I didn't want to lose that.
Interesting.
And the same with a lot of times people will ask me, oh, were you like a shy person and you didn't have a lot of connections and you wanted to do this to kind of grow out of your, like, get out of your shell? And I was like, no, I loved meeting people. I've always loved it. And it felt really authentic and easy during college, and then it felt difficult afterwards. And I didn't want to stop just because college stopped or just because school in general stopped. So me doing this project is me diving further into myself rather than me trying to make up for an area that I felt like I lacked.
Gotcha. So it's actually something that you just truly love and you want to do more of then.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. It's, there's not too many people that that follow there. I don't know, it almost sounds like a compulsion at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the way that I see the world, I think a lot of people will stick to the safe route.
Yeah.
And sometimes for really good reason too. Like if you have a family to support, like I'm single, I don't have a wife or kids. It's easy for me to dedicate my time to this. But I think a lot of people, whether they feel they don't have like as high of a risk tolerance or their circumstances may not allow them to take a risk like this. For me, I just see the world, I'm like, it doesn't make sense for me to sit in an office until age 65 and then retire and then try to enjoy my life. Like I very much think about my life as a timeline, and success is not getting to a point. It's like coloring that timeline with as much fulfillment as I can. So I've always thought about with my project, if I were to do it and it were to be a failure in however way, like I would still have spent 15 years doing something that I really enjoyed, even if I didn't get to like a big house or a house in general or whatever it might be. And I think a lot of people think like, well, I'll do 15 years of something I don't like, and then I'll get to this destination of this thing and I'll be able to ride that out for the rest. But I don't know, part of it too is like life is not promised. And I don't really think about that too much in my project, but I do sometimes. I'm like, well, I assume that I'm going to meet 10,000 people. I assume I'll be here for the next 8 years, but I don't know. I could walk outside and get hit by a bus today. So I'm not going to waste my time doing something that I don't enjoy.
I very much have a very similar perspective on things, is that, nothing is promised. There's no guarantee you're going to wake up tomorrow. So my saying is eat the cake. Always eat the cake, or get the dessert. Either way you want to look at it. For me, that was I had a friend of mine. So I did a little time in Memphis, and I met some amazing people there. And Will Lewis was one of them, and he had started having some health problems and stuff like that. And so we started communicating more and more, and I became kind of like, I guess, a shoulder to lean on. Right? He's like this huge bigger than life bear of a man. And, he was always the person everybody would go to if they had problems. And he didn't know what to do when he had problems, right? Because he's always like the person that solves all the problems. So we sort of talked a lot, and there was a little lull where I didn't talk to him for about a week. And so I was getting ready to call him, and I looked down at my phone because it had buzzed, and there he was texting me. I was like, hey, there's my guy. And, it's like right on cue. He heard me talking about him, or rather thinking about him, I guess. And when I opened the text, it was actually his wife telling me that he had passed away, like the health stuff had got him. And so my wife and I took kind of a crazy adventure to get down there to the funeral. Life's never a straight path, right? It's not some linear thing that you can just follow dot to dot. And we ended up getting there. And after the service, it was in some tiny town in Tennessee, and we went to this restaurant, and I was looking at the menu, and the dessert sounded good. I said, get the dessert, right? Because who knows? Maybe I won't have an opportunity tomorrow, and I don't want to let any of that stuff slip by, So I'm very much a seize the moment kind of person. If you've got it in front of you, let's take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, it's wild how it takes other people's experiences to remind us of that in our own lives.
For sure.
And I think that's one of the things I enjoy about the journey of what I'm doing. I say like it forces me to hold a mirror up to myself every single day, because now I try to meet 3 people every day. And when I hear, like, I was talking to a girl on Saturday who is a doctor, and she was like, I just had a patient in his 30s, like early 30s, who was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And I was like, well, what's the outlook on that? And she said, she's like, I think he'll be pretty good with it, but she's like, the optimistic chances are like 20% survival. I was like, man, that's crazy. I'm 32, so right, like same age as me. So I'm like constantly, this message is reinforced in my life with that and a bunch of different things. But yeah, I think the people around us constantly inspire us.
I just from stalking you lightly, not heavy stalking, just light stalking, I've noticed there seems to be a lot of parallels in kind of the stuff we do. I love having conversations with people just to learn. And honestly, I want to talk to people that are extremely different than me most of the time. This is kind of a rare occasion where I get to talk to somebody who feels a little bit more similar, only, just a better version of me with better hair, obviously.
But not a better mustache, though.
You just got to believe in yourself. That's all.
Yeah.
Something I've noticed is my favorite conversations with people are when they challenge something I understood to be true, and then I reevaluate, and like I look at the world a little bit differently. Is that something that excites you? Like for me, it is like, it's almost like I am so excited after that happens that I can't wait to like tell somebody else. Like that, to me, that's one of the biggest things that come out of this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm very much the same way in that sense. I think I had like a journey of growth with that, where in college I felt like if I had a product idea in my mind that it would sell really well. Or there was, when I worked at the tech startup, I worked on the sales team, and there was like 19 of us, and we had speakers. It was like a young hip startup. Everyone was in their 20s. We had speakers, so we could just play whatever music out loud. So we'd always have like music going in the office during the day. And I, at the time, was into EDM. I still like it, but I was into it, and I was in my mid-20s, so it was like lined up nicely with like going out to the bars and that stage of life. And I remember playing the music and seeing some of the other guys like put their headphones in, and I was like, what the heck? How can you put your headphones in? I'm playing great songs right now. And it was a moment of realization that just because I think something is cool, it doesn't mean that everyone thinks it's cool. Just because I had this experience doesn't mean that everyone had this experience. And I think I'm constantly seeing the world from different perspectives. I talked to a girl yesterday from Saudi Arabia, and it was cool to hear her because she was telling me about how her travels opened her eyes. And she was like, yeah, I went to France and it was so different from what I know culturally. And I thought that was really interesting because I went to France and I was like, yeah, this is not far off from what I know. So I said, I would love to go to Saudi Arabia and see what her norm is, but what is different for me. But at the same time, she's 30 and she was talking about how she's had this passion for linguistics. And she's like, yeah, it comes from my childhood because I loved listening to the Backstreet Boys and watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And like, I had the Backstreet Boys Millennium CD as well. So it's weird because you could be so different, but have these little things that tie you together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, for me, it's talking to different people. Yeah, it's always, it's kind of like this little window into another world, I guess. And for me, I've wanted to do this particular one. So I am in tech sales. I am working at a startup. So
Nice.
yeah. I'm just like Rob 2.0, the older, balder version.
Sure.
Yeah. But so yeah, very, very similar there. But yeah, I've noticed having these conversations definitely. I love the little insights. I love how it changes me, and I find myself like constantly saying, somebody once told me, because I feel like none of these stories are mine. That's something else that's like, I'm curious to talk to somebody else who's done a lot of this too. It's like, I feel like none of these stories are necessarily mine, like these lessons I've learned. So I always feel like this responsibility to say, this person told me, or that person, like I always want to give credit to the person that like changed the way I think or feel about this thing. But ultimately, it's now the way I think or feel. So I don't know why I still feel this responsibility to say like, this person changed me for the better, right? It's like, because now that's part of me. So it's this weird juxtaposition. I noticed you're doing that a lot too. You're saying, this person told me, that person told me.
Yeah. I think I don't know why I feel to justify that either, but maybe it's just because that was the point at which you had your eyes opened. And I say the same thing. I'm like, I'm not an interesting person. I'm just a very normal dude who meets people. I watch Philly sports in the evenings. I read books. I'm tight with my family. But I'm interesting as a derivative of the people I've met. I'm like the keeper of these stories that I can throw out at parties and stuff. So yeah, I see that a lot. Do you have, because you talk about like this growth or this difference or like seeing things from a different perspective, when you talk about that, do you have a specific example in your mind that you can think of?
No, man, it's usually situational. It's whatever comes up. I mean, there are some very specific ones that I can point out.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked to, I was thinking about it just now because like this is usually when I do my thinking. When I'm talking, it doesn't make sense. But it's like when I hear my own voice vocalizing these things, it's like for me, it's kind of honoring the gift. I think like somebody gave me this gift, and I want to honor them by crediting. I want to cite my sources, maybe like my dissertation here. But no, you said specific examples. One would be say like Molly Balloons. She legally changed her last name to Balloons, and she does a bunch of balloon events. So right, somebody will have her come in and like transform this whole space. Right, it'll look like something from like outer space or something, or like this forest scene, but it's all made out of balloons. Or she does fashion that's made out of balloons, and I don't know. She's just like a super cool person that just like her vibe just kind of radiates off of her. Like she's got like her own gravity that seems to pull people in. But she kind of changed the way I look at gratitude, and it's so funny. Just like these little things. She said she doesn't have pet peeves. She has pet faves, right? She picks out things that are her favorite. And so she gave a couple examples. She's like, I like it when I get in an Uber and I'm sitting in the back seat and the window goes all the way down. The glass doesn't stop like 3 inches up, right? Yeah. She goes, I love it when little kids give me finger guns. She's like, those are pet faves. She said she started making lists of all her pet faves and sharing her with her friends, and they do it back. And she said some of their pet faves have become my pet faves. And so like after hearing that, I started doing that myself. Only I don't necessarily create lists, but what I do is whenever I see something that's just small, but actually brings me joy, makes me happy. And you know what I found? It's like almost every one of these things are due to the people around me. Like I truly enjoy something that they do or share with me or whatever it happens to be. And so I point out that pet fave. I said, this is a pet fave. And it's one, me recognizing that this thing makes me happy, but also two, sharing with the other person that this brings me joy. And so I'm a big advocate of tell the people around you that you love them and they're important to you because they may not be here tomorrow. And I love making it weird and awkward because as men, like cisgender white guys, we're not supposed to like tell other people that we care about them or let alone that we love them. But to me, I super don't give a crap about any of that stuff. Like if it's in my heart, I want you to know it, sort of thing. So that was a big one for me, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have two thoughts on that. My friend, the first of my friends who got married, we went, me and my other friend helped him pick out the engagement ring for his wife. I think, and then we went out to lunch afterwards. It was the three of us and his dad. And we were saying goodbye. And we were like, all right, I'll see you later, man. I love you. And his dad was like, that's so nice. Like, too many people say, I hate this. I hate this. And not enough people say, I love you. And so with my good friends and with my siblings and with my parents, if I am on the phone with one of my buddies from college, I'll be like, all right, man, I love you. I'll talk to you later. And I think it's so funny that people think that can't be a thing like associated with masculinity. To me, the people who feel like they can't do that are the most insecure people. And it's such a backwards way of thinking to me. So I like that you have that mindset as well, because it's like when you're 90 years old on your deathbed, are you going to be like, oh, I told someone I loved them once and it was embarrassing. Like, what? That's crazy to me. The other thing, the pet faves, I think is really cool. There was a book that I read once called The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker. He's a Harvard professor of applied positive psychology. And in the book, he talks about the Tetris effect. So they had this study where they had a bunch of people play Tetris for hours on end. And then they went to the grocery stores and stuff, or they just would talk to them about their experience at the grocery store. And they'd be like, yeah, this box would have fit really nice in that box of cereal or whatever. Like they started to see the world through the lens of Tetris. And it is like the same thing happens if you focus on the positives, you start to see the positives out in the world. And if you focus on the negatives all the time, you see the negatives out in the world. And you and I both, I'm sure, have people in our lives that you can think of like, that person is always pointing out the negatives, or that person's a really positive person. And I think when you have something as simple as a pet fave to encourage you to look for the positive, you start to see it more often. And I say the same thing with my project when I do my talks. I say, the more I interact with the depth of people, the more I acknowledge that it exists, because it's really hard for me to look at a person and not think about the fact that they have a childhood, they have an adolescence, they have a ton of who they are outside of my surface level interaction with them.
Have you ever heard of the word sonder?
Yeah, it's my favorite word.
Yeah. Because that's you're giving me vibes there, kind of leading into that. And I guess for anybody listening, give us your definition of what sonder means.
It's the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own, populated with their own friends, routines, worries, ambitions, and inherited craziness.
Yeah. Oh, you had that locked and loaded, brother. You were ready to go. Yeah.
I have it. It's a slide in my talks.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. All right. You are intimately familiar with it, but I still remember, I don't know, what do you call it? Like cognitive dissonance, like the moment where something kind of rattled in my brain when I understood that to be true, that everybody is this complex galaxy of, competing emotions inside and just craziness going on, and everything you feel, they feel as well. And it's hard not to look at people differently. I think when you one thing to understand the definition of a word, and something different is to really take it on board and to understand it emotionally and see it as the truth that it is. But it's so easy to get in our routines. I like to imagine it as my dogs in the backyard. They run the same route in the yard. And so there's these little paths where the grass doesn't grow anymore. It's so easy to get stuck in those routines. Very seldom do we stray and adventure into the tall grass. You can tell I don't like to mow very often. So it's the tall grass, right?
Yeah. I agree with that, though. I think connection should be something that I think it's very similar to going to the gym. Like, if you stop going to the gym, you're not going to be as muscular or as fit or as strong. If you stop connecting with people, you're not going to be as aware of the depth of them or open to it or whatever it might be. So I think intentional connection is worthwhile and really important in life. And my project is my excuse to meet with people. Your podcast is an excuse to meet with people. So we both have intentional connection in our lives. So we're both capturing the value of it, which is really cool. I try to encourage everyone to find a way to do that in their lives, whether it's just like a goal that becomes part of their identity or something like a project that they take on. Because when you do that and you treat connection like an experience rather than a transaction, it can sit back. Like, you can sit back and it can become this really comfortable thing where there are no expectations, but things still naturally come as a result of it.
Absolutely. And connection, making real human connection, has become something so important for me, and special, I guess, is probably. So growing up, I was very quiet and shy and socially awkward, and I didn't like big crowds, and slowly over time sort of morphed. Like, my younger self wouldn't even recognize who I am today. It's so different. And at a very early age, I learned to turn my feelings off to protect myself and just not feel anything. And that valve kind of got stuck, kind of got rusted shut and stayed that way for a really long time. And it's funny how, and I have to make it, this is a reason for me to do this thing. And whenever I really make a human connection, I've since learned to turn that tap back on, right, and feel things. But it helped me kind of, I guess, break the rust from that thing and learn to kind of control it. Because for me at first, once I started feeling stuff, it was like the fire hose. It was like way too much, too fast. And I was like, you can't walk around in life like that. It's like, how do people live like this? Is insanity. So it helped teach me to sort of regulate it, and find that balance. But whenever I do have a real connection with somebody, like, I can feel it. Like, it's an actual feeling inside me, and I truly enjoy and appreciate that. Also, the idea that this quiet person that just sort of saw the world from the outside to start feeling like the spider web of connection with all these other people. It's, I don't know, like, what is it? Community? You're building a community or something like that. You're making friends, I guess, to somebody who wasn't ever great at it. I guess, making friends with people, it's exactly what your project is named. So I don't know why I'm sort of explaining this to you, but this is the way I think and process things. It's fascinating for me.
How old were you when you turned that tap back on, and what was the catalyst for you to turn it back on?
Oh, it was in my 30s, probably. So I'm 42 now. So I waited a while. I think the catalyst was just slow time, just, progression of things. I started actually becoming more introspective, like just turning, like you said, the mirror back at myself and starting to look at myself. Well, sometimes there were things I would do or ways I would react that, one, I didn't like, and two, I didn't understand, and I just never examined them. I assumed that was just the way I was made. This is how I am. So accept it and move on. And then I eventually realized that you can change these things. I guess sort of around this time, the company I was working for, they said, hey, we're looking at doing bonuses, but you got to do executive development. I was like, okay, what does that mean? Well, we need you to do these things. And part of it was reading some executive books. And so I was like, this is a waste of time. Ironically, I've always been a technology person, so I've always done certifications and stuff like that, like improved myself and my knowledge on these technical things. And so I don't know why it never occurred to me that I could do that to me as a human. But I've also learned that executive books are just self-help books in a business suit. It's the same sort of information. And so I remember reading this one called Leadership and Self-Deception. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one or not, but one of the passages in there, they were talking about self-deception. And so this guy gave an example, and he said, when my son was, I think he said my son was like 6 months old or something like that. And one night at 3 a.m., he woke me up crying. I could hear him. And he said, my first instinct was to go and soothe him, pick him up and take care of him. And he's like, but then I realized it was 3 a.m. And so I started making excuses, right? And he was saying that the instant you go against what you know is right in your head, nothing good comes from it, right? The self-deception, you're deceiving yourself. So he said, I've got this big meeting tomorrow. I'm so important. So he had to inflate himself. And he's like, I know my wife hears this. Like, I don't know why she's not taking care of it. What is she, a bad mom? So he had to start like knocking her down. And he said that actually sat with him for several days. It's funny because my wife was like feeling under the weather at the time. And so I was like taking out the trash and doing some stuff like that. And I was like, I'm so special. Look at me. And I was thinking, like, it just, all that stuff kind of coalesced at the same time. And I just realized, like, why can't I be this way all the time? Why can't I, as soon as I know something is right, don't walk by that sock, don't see that the dog threw up on the rug and then you just go to work anyway and pretend like you didn't see it, let somebody else take care. It's like, why do that? Why not just take care of the thing right when you know it? And it's funny because I took that information in and I immediately changed my behavior. It's so funny. I don't think most people can do that. I'm a little bit autistic, so I've learned that about myself as well.
Sure.
And apparently I can take in new information and flip a switch and utilize it, which is, I think, somewhat abnormal. But also, I had kept up that behavior for about a month. And then I asked my wife if she noticed. And her response was basically, we'll see if it lasts. I was like, oh, I'm going to show you. I'll show you. I was going to do it anyway. But it wasn't until like 5 years later I revisited that conversation with her. She's like, yeah, you kept it up. But it's I learned, like, there's these things about me that I can do better and be better. Because I took in some information, and most of that stuff, like the executive development stuff I've learned is like, one, don't be an a-hole. If you are an a-hole, apologize and mean it and don't do it again. And then remember that your employees are people. Treat them like humans, right? So it's like it mostly all boiled down to that. And so you'd get a little nugget from each one of those you'd read or whatever. But I've learned that I can take in new information. I can change. I can be better. The fastest way I do it is through other people. So having these conversations, I didn't start doing this sort of thing for a really long time, but having conversations genuinely helps me get there faster, because I can hear somebody tell me something and I can try and be empathetic. I can try and feel it, and I'll guess, and they'll tell me if I'm right or if I'm wrong, right? So that autistic side of my brain, I'm running scenarios, like figuring it out, but also matching the emotion to the thing, and kind of building from that respect. That's a lot of stuff really fast. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that's good. That's
right. Rock and roll.
I agree. I learn most through people, and I think kind of similar with the leadership book. I feel like my journey has forced me to rid myself of ego. I won't say that it's all gone, because I don't think people ever lose their ego, but I think I've minimized it a lot. I think back on when I was in college and I did well in class and stuff, and I was really involved, and I had a lot of friends and stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna go be this investment banker, go be this consultant, and I'm so good at what I do, and I'm smart and all this stuff. And then I don't know, I just heard stories like, I talked to a guy recently here in Philly who's a Temple student, and he was pursuing like acting and music, and he's like, yeah, I had to take time off last year. Like I take a semester off because I couldn't afford school. And I'm like, man, that challenge is so, like when I went to college, my parents were like, here's the financial aid stuff. We'll help you fill it out. Like you're going to have loans at the end. We'll help you as much as we can along the way. And I worked throughout school, but there was never a semester where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford school this semester.
Right.
So this kid went home and he worked at Chick-fil-A for the time that he was home and built back up his money. And then his community like came together and they did like a drive to help him get furniture for when he moved into like an off-campus apartment. He looked at the off-campus prices versus the on-campus prices and figured out like he could work with the finances and do it that way. And I'm like, the issue that he is solving of how do I go to college and afford it and furnish my place is so much more difficult and requires so much more strategy than me trying to do well on a finance exam. So I feel like I would get knocked down a bunch. And yeah, there's a girl that I met who had to drop out of college, not because she was not smart enough or not motivated enough. Like her mom couldn't afford to pay rent on her own. So this girl had to drop out of school to get a job to contribute rent. So her mom had a place to stay. And like, that is a much more difficult scenario and requires more challenging thinking than anything that I had to do in college. So I'm like, because I have my degree, there's no way that I'm better than her who doesn't have her college degree or whatever. And that's just one of like hundreds of examples that come my way throughout my project. So yeah, I feel like I'm constantly learning from people and applying. I say doing this project has helped me learn how wide the spectrum of life passes, and it's helped me learn where I fit on that spectrum.
Do you feel like you compare yourself to the people you're talking to a lot? Like compare your life experience and say, man, this was so much harder for you than it was for me?
Sometimes. I think there's a healthy way to do it and a not healthy way to do it. I think there's the comparison culture, right? Of this person has all this great stuff. Look at them on their lavish vacation. Right. I'll never have that. I can never do that. I don't believe in that stuff. I say like, if I see something, it means it's possible. On the other end, I think there's like this idea of toxic positivity of like, oh, well, I can be happy no matter what. Look how much worse they have it. I think I just find it in gratitude when I hear of someone, like there's a girl that I met, I think she has osteogenesis imperfecta. So she spent her life in a wheelchair. She's like maybe like 2 or 3 feet tall. And right after I met her, she was going through this spine lengthening surgery. I think it was like scoliosis or something like that. But she had to have a crown, like a metal crown, screwed into her head for 12 weeks, I think. And it had like a subtle weight that would lift, kind of like, you wouldn't feel it, but it would like help lengthen her spine to prepare her for the surgery. So she had 4 screws in her skull holding this thing in place. And she had complications where like the screws came loose and fell out, and they had to screw them back in while she was awake on the operating table. And she was talking about like how loud she was screaming, and she felt bad for the nurses that she was screaming so loud. And yeah, which is crazy. And this is a girl who is like, don't look at my story and be like, oh, because she has a YouTube channel, and she said when she made her YouTube channel, that was the first time that she was like, I didn't realize how other people saw me of like, oh, this poor girl, this poor this, and like, how could she like live this life and stuff. So I understand her perspective of like, your life is not something for me just to be like motivated by, because I'm like, oh, look at your poor story, you've been through so much. But at the same time, I'm like, if I had screws that were being screwed into my skull while I was awake on a table, that'd be a really painful experience. So I acknowledge that you went through this really tough thing, And I admire your strength for going through it. And it shows me how resilient people can be. And it forces me to, like, if I am feeling down about finances, or if I feel like people aren't paying attention to the project or whatever, I'm like, I would still rather choose this than having screwed into my skull. So it just gives me perspective.
Yeah, for sure. After talking to so many people for so long, obviously I'm not at the level you are. But yeah, I just compared myself. It's not what I meant to do.
Yeah.
No, for me, like, I don't know. I kind of look, I don't know. It's like everybody's a cake. You know what I mean? It's like you follow a different recipe. It's different ingredients. And if one takes 4 hours to make versus 15 minutes, it doesn't mean one is better or worse than the other. It's just the process. And something I've learned over time is that, like, our character isn't defined by easy, comfortable moments that happen in our lives. It's all born of adversity, you know? Like, I was imagining, you know, if we are statues, like the statue of David, right? It wasn't made by gentle strokes, right? He didn't rub a soft cloth on the marble. No, it was a hammer and it was a chisel, and it was violent action that created this amazing thing that people admire. And I think just about everybody I've met is the same way. You know, this amazing person that stands before me was born out of adversity. It was created out of the, you know, the forge and the fire and the hammer blows. And so, while I wouldn't wish bad things on anybody, the amazing people I've met were born from these things. And I appreciate it. You know, I appreciate them. And oftentimes, I'm awed at some of the stories people tell me. Just the openness with which they'll share their lives blows me away. And to be honest, I'm an open book. Like, I have no problem telling anybody anything. And my wife repeatedly tells me that that's not normal. Most people aren't like that. So, you know, if you are an open book, I tend to ask questions that are maybe too personal sometimes. But like I said, you'll find your tribe really quick, the people that answer. So I like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the more you talk to people too, the more you understand the nuance of when you can go deep with someone and when you might have to hover a little bit more and with someone. And you probably see that through your podcast, and I've certainly got that through my project. And I did a talk, and someone was like, well, how do you know when you can go deeper without offending someone, or if you're supposed to stay surface level? And I've thought about that question since then. I'm like, I don't know. I think you just have to I think you just have to meet more people, because I feel like that'd be like saying, well, how do you know when you're driving, like, how it feels to turn the wheel the appropriate amount to take the turn? It's like, you got to get out there and do it. You got to get the feeling of it.
Yeah, you got to get those reps, right? Like, you go to the gym.
Yeah.
You just got to show up every day, put in the work. I agree. Like, I have talked to some people, and while a subject will immediately pique my interest, I'll brush against it. And if I sense the resistance, I move on. You know, it's just, I understand that maybe that's not something they want to give more information on, and that's totally cool. And that part of my brain will eventually quiet down. Like, I always want to know, you know, so I say, like, and I have to say this very calmly, like, when I'm with my wife and she's driving, if my brain calculates that taking a right is the most efficient route at this time of day with the current traffic conditions, if she takes a left, I'm not questioning how you're driving. My brain just needs to know, like, what was the calculation you did to get there? And so I'm like that with a lot of people. Like, I'm not questioning you. My brain just is curious. Like, why'd you turn right instead of left, or vice versa?
Yeah.
But yeah, I would imagine with talking as many people as you do, you probably get a ton of reps as far as that goes. And I'm sure you started developing this muscle memory for, you see this personality type, you probably have a decent idea of, oh, maybe this is a middle child, or maybe they were really poor growing up. I'm assuming you've kind of gotten some muscle memory for that stuff, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's more of a subconscious thing than a conscious thing. But yeah, it's maybe like less of people's like life circumstances and more of just their general personality of oh, this is going to be a one word answer person. Like they might be really socially anxious when it comes to conversation. Oh, this person is like fully focused on like they are the main character of their story and maybe they're not seeing outside of that or different things like that. But yeah, I think that's something that at some point in my life I'll have to sit down and reflect on and do some research on. I would say like I didn't mind reading the books in grade school. Like I liked reading the books. I hated doing the book reports. And with my project, a lot of people were in the early days when I was looking for validation of, hey, is this a journey I should go down? I talked to, because even from the beginning, I was like, oh, I'm going to keep track of it on social media. Then maybe I can take on partnerships and because of the goodwill of the project, I'll be able to support it in some way. So I would reach out to people who are already doing like Instagram partnerships, like the like influencer agencies and stuff. And I remember talking to one guy and he was like, yeah, it's interesting, but I don't think people are going to want to just sit down with you for no reason and be part of this project. He's like, I think you need to have like the same 5-10 questions and then ask everyone that and then show what are the differences and similarities between people's answers. And in my mind, I'm like, that's really dumb because I could just send out a survey to 10,000 people and be done like that. The more human thing is to sit with people and actually learn who they are. But of course, people want to know what you've learned. So it's just my nature to enjoy it for what it is and not have to analyze it. But I think it will be important at one point to analyze it so I can share in a more concrete way what this experience has been for me.
You know, I've heard the same kind of stuff. Like I've had people ask me, what questions are you going to ask? And I say, well, there's only one question I ask. And then we just go from there. Some people that freaks them out and some people are totally cool with that. I would say most people kind of want a little bit of an idea of what's coming at them. I don't. I love spontaneity. I love the mystery of it. But one thing I have sort of thought about is what would it be like to, at least the guests, they're on the precipice of something, right? They're about to embark on a major adventure or something like that. Or oftentimes I think about it with the younger people I talk to. What would it be like to circle back 5 years later and have a conversation with them just to see where they are now? Obviously not ask the exact same questions, but, you know, see how they've sort of changed their feelings on various things. You know, if they were so excited about this new car as this most important thing in the whole world to them, you look back 5 years later, you know, what are your thoughts on that, you know, or 10 years later, or whatever it means to be. I'd be fascinated to see the growth of people, because that's something that has fascinated me, like how much I've changed over time. And I've often thought the biggest insult somebody could give me is to say, oh, you're just the same. You never change, Greg. It's like, no, I change all the time. You know, I whether you see it or not, that's okay. But for me, I feel the change, and I'd be curious to see how some of the folks you talk to change over time as well, or at least me. I've thought about that myself. Have you thought about that?
I've thought about it. I've also been able to see it because I follow every person that I meet, and some of the people that I've met 5 years ago. So I remember this one girl who was a student at Temple University, and she knew exactly what she was going to do. She was like, I'm going to go into law school after this, and then I'm going to go into like white collar crime, and I'm going to be like a prosecutor in that space. And it just struck me because she was so confident about what she was going to do. And then it was like a couple of years ago, I saw her Instagram account, and she's like a park ranger at a national park. And I'm like, I see you've changed. Probably because she probably discovered like a passion that she had. I think a lot of people, like I understand 5-year plans and 10-year plans, and I think about them sometimes, but my future is just a rolling average of what the last 2 to 3 months of my life have been. So I'm much more of like, we're just gonna like, I'll have a direction. Like I think after my project, I plan to be a full-time speaker, speaking like twice a month, and be a professor at a university, teaching a course for first-year students where they pair off one-on-one every class period and do exactly what we're doing so they can learn from each other's backgrounds rather than a textbook or a PowerPoint slide. I know you understand the value in that, but yeah, I'm like, okay, I'll be a professor. I'll speak 2 times a month. I'll have my wife and kids. I'll have the freedom and flexibility to do whatever I want with them, go to their shows and stuff, whatever. And I also understand that my life could look totally different than that. But my path to get there in the near term is just what's happened in the last 2 months. I just signed to a speaker manager a month ago. And 2 months ago, that wasn't in my plans. Now it's my main strategy of how I'm going to be a successful speaker going forward. And because of signing with her, I'm having a new website that's coming out soon. They're tweaking my demo reel. They're helping me with my keynote content. Like, my branding will be a little bit different. Things that I wasn't really thinking about before. So yeah, and it's always been that way because I lived in LA for 1.5 years over 3 separate periods of time. I live in Philly now, where I'm originally from. I grew up in the suburbs. I live in the city now. But when I was in LA, I'd be like, I don't know, I'm here for 3 months, and then I think I'll go back to Philly, and then I'd be in Philly and be like, oh, I'm going back to LA in 5 months. And then I ended up in Hoboken for 9 months. So I could never see what was in front of me. So I stopped trying to look for it.
Yeah, I think I live roughly about 2 to 3 weeks into the future. That's about as far as my binoculars see. So at jobs, whenever they talk about, oh, what's your 1-year plan, 5-year plan? The last place I legitimately put, my plan is to be employed and enjoy my job.
Yeah.
Like, if you,
very, very honest.
I've gotten to the point where I'm too old to try and make up stuff. Maybe ChatGPT could have done it for me.
Sure.
But right now it's like, I am a completely transparent person. That's as far as I look into the future, and that keeps me happy, keeps me sane, keeps me grounded. I think more in the moment too, which is where I want to live.
Yeah, it's where people say you should live. Like, all you have is the present, right?
Well, if I worry about anything else, it brings me no joy, nothing but anxiety. So I try and stay right here where I can affect a little bit of change.
Yeah.
Right? I know I can't change, or rather control, many things other than my thoughts and my intentions.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, man, like the full-time speaker thing, being a professor, that sounds fascinating. I've got to do kind of little things at the university here where I go and help out with various stuff like that. And I absolutely adore working with those young kids. One, they want to be there, not like my kids who absolutely can't wait to do anything else. But they want to be there. They're truly interested and excited, and curiosity just abounds in those environments. So, like, to me, that seems like such an exciting opportunity. Like, did you ever imagine anything like this for yourself? What's the feeling it gives you to think about that?
I never intended to do speaking. I remember talking to other speakers early in my project, a kid who was just coming out of high school. And it was very interesting because I think he had just graduated from high school, and his goal was to become, I think, like a Tony Robbins type figure. In my mind, that would have been like the pinnacle of this kid's path. But he was explaining to me how, like, his approach, he's like, well, you know, I'm going to a lot of local schools now, and I'm going to talk about bullying, to talk to the kids about not bullying. And he's like, and then I'll get like footage and stuff from that, and eventually I'll put together a reel, and I'll try to get some paid gigs, and then I can get my paid gigs and get like a website and stuff. And that's exactly kind of what I've done. I was like, the kid has a pet. Like, you can do that. You don't have to be like, I went through 10 years of bullying, 10 years of trainings, and now I'm imparting this wisdom. It almost becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the wisdom that he can impart was what he's learning along the way of the journey of trying to become the speaker while doing the free stuff and building up his name and whatnot. So, but that didn't really appeal to me. And then I met a girl in August of 2019 who, she was speaking about a project that she had done called 100 Days Without Fear. Her name is Michelle Pollard. And she was like, yeah, I'm like charging like 17 grand per speech right now, and speaking 70 times this year. And this was 4 years ago. And that to me opened my mind to like, oh, there's a path here to actually, when I thought about it, it felt like the most authentic way that I could support what I was doing, because up to that point, I just figured I'd do social media partnerships, and I had done them. But there's a different feeling of like, hey, this meeting was held at WeWork today. Like, follow them if you want to support my project, versus going to a group of realtors and being like, here's how you can make your clients feel better seen and heard based on the 5,000 interactions that I've had with people. And I'm going to connect you with each other so you learn a little bit more beneath the surface. And like, I've seen some really cool things come from that. So it felt so authentic and it feels good. I'm on the cusp now. I think I've just gotten over the hump of feeling comfortable on stage. I spoke to 2,000 teens in Buffalo, New York the other week, and I felt fine on stage, which is a new experience for me because it was one of the first times that I didn't have a voice in my mind saying, you have to leave. I can't do this. You have to get out of this situation, which in the past would come like in the middle of my speeches, and I'd start to go into like panic attack mode and start to get visually nervous and verbally nervous. And that is probably my biggest area of growth within the last couple of years. Like, it was to the point where if I had a speech coming up, I'd be nervous for these meetings, my one-on-one meetings. It would spill over into other areas of my life. And then I was like, I'm worrying about this so much that it's not serving me in any way. So I just stopped caring. Like, if I had an event, like I'm speaking in Vegas in June, and I'm not thinking about it because I'm starting to trust myself that I know what I'm talking about when I get on stage. People will enjoy me if I am my natural personality. So that feels really good to start to get to that place, because I've always felt like if I have confidence in myself on stage, then I'm going to be okay. Like, I think my story is interesting. I think what I've learned is important. If I have that confidence, I think I'll be okay, because otherwise I didn't want to like go in front of people and be nervous and then be like, yeah, this guy's talking to me, but it doesn't really seem like he knows what he's talking about. He doesn't even confident in himself. But I feel like I've passed that point.
Yeah. Something somebody told me one time really resonated with me. They said, I never worried about whether, like, there were never voices in my head that said I couldn't do something. It's like, they just said, I know I could do anything. Like, I'm capable. I just got to figure out how to do it. And I was like, that's absolutely true. That's like, genuinely, I never thought I couldn't do something. So you just got to figure out how to make that a reality. I've done public speaking before, and I remember those early terrifying days, and it was horrible. I was horrible, bad, terrible, and slowly became less bad. And now I think I'm tolerable at this. I truly enjoy getting in front of big crowds of people. Like, the idea that I have a feeling inside me and I can use words to convey that and have other people feel that is like such an amazing thing for me, at least. I'm not sure if you've experienced that or not. I talked to, I'm going to have to reference the person, Professor Tim Wilson. He's an amazing guy out of Oxford. And he was telling me that whenever you're doing a presentation, it's like if I'm like marrying a couple of people, which I've done, and the crowd, you make them laugh, you make them cry, and then you make them laugh again. He's like, what you're experiencing is, you're being charismatic, charisma. And then he broke it down to like the Greek origins of the word. And he basically said it's to respirate, right? It's the crowd is breathing in what you're sending their direction, right? And he said, but it's a two-way street. They're also breathing out, and you have to accept from them. And I thought that was I love imagery. I love metaphors. And so I was like, that's such a beautiful way of saying what it kind of feels like sometimes on stage, and kind of your responsibility for the crowd, that you're basically giving them oxygen to breathe in. I love the idea of that. You're bringing life to this presentation. Not to say that wouldn't put more pressure on it, but I feel like it just makes it sort of like this mystical, magical connection that you have with other people, which is something that's really important to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like the more that you do it, the less of this big, scary monster it becomes.
Yeah, a lot of get those reps in.
Yeah, it's just driven by like the unknown of what it feels like to be in front of 2,000 people, or what it feels like to hear your voice coming out of the microphone. And then as you get more familiar with that stuff, they're like, oh, okay. I tell myself the stage is my home. Like, I like being home. I want to associate the stage with a comfortable place that I like being.
Gotcha. So you just show up in your pajamas.
Yeah. Yeah. They keep hiring me somehow. I don't know. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, Rob, I tell you what, time is a gift, and we are 1 minute over. So I want to be very respectful of your time for a guy who stays as busy as you do. So I know there are some things you would like people to see. So how would you have folks connect with you, interact with you? What are your preferred things?
Yeah. My Instagram account is called Rob's 10K Friends. It's ROBS10K Friends. That's where I keep track of everyone that I meet and their story. If people want to be part of my project, my journey to meet 10,000 people, they can DM me there. I treat that as my email inbox. And then I have a website, it's robs10kfriends.com. They can go there if they're interested in seeing some of like the press that I've done. My speaking website, which will be released soon, is roblawless.com, just ROBLAWLESS. So they could see like my demo reel and stuff, or if they're ever interested in hiring me, they can go there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If people want to follow along.
You forgot also patreon.com/Rob's 10K
Yes.
Friends. Don't forget that, man.
Yeah.
Why do people always forget about monetary methods people can support them? Because I'm a big proponent of, if people are making creative projects that, bring some light and love into the world, I want to support that. So definitely hop over to Rob's Patreon. And
thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. That is a way that people can support. If they like what I'm doing and the impact that I'm making on the world, and they want to hear what's going on in my mind every week and some of the things that I learned from people and people who stood out to me, they can definitely subscribe to Patreon, and that'd be a big help.
That's cool. All right. Well, Rob, you are open book. You are honest. You are an awesome conversationalist and a good human. And I'm going to say thanks. And then I'm going to click stop on all this stuff.